Could Texas turn blue? It seemed a far-fetched question until Democrat Beto O Rourke took on Republican Ted Cruz in last year's hotly contested Senate race. O'Rourke lost, but even in defeat, he was propelled onto the national stage, and now a run for the White House. The former three-term congressman joins me now. Beto O'Rourke, welcome to the NewsHour.
Thank you for having me on. I'm grateful.
So, out of the 23 Democrats seeking the nomination, why should voters choose you?
You talked about Texas in your introduction. I was extraordinarily lucky enough to be part of one of the greatest movements we've seen in that state. A state that had ranked 50th in voter turnout, came out in record numbers. Not just Democrats, led by young people who turned out at a rate of 500% over what they had in the last midterm, but independents and Republicans as well. I won more votes than any Democrat had in the history of our state, and we ensured that the 38 electoral college votes that had not been won by a Democrat since 1976 when Jimmy Carter did were now unlocked for this country. That way of helping to lead a grassroots movement, no PACs, all people, is a way in which we're going to defeat Donald Trump in 2020, and the way by which we will bring this deeply divided country together around our common challenges of climate, of the economy, of ensuring that everyone has health care and is well enough to live to their full potential.
I think a lot of people looked at that race and said, Beto O'Rourke, he's got some kind of magic. They looked at how you challenged, you came closer than anybody expected. This race, though, has been tougher for you. You so far haven't broken into what they're calling the top tier. Is that magic gone?
I'll tell you, at the outset of the Senate race, or for that matter, the outset of any race that I've run, no poll would have predicted our performance. If you look at any presidential poll of June, the year before the election takes place, that has rarely, if ever, predicted the final outcome. So if we wait for polls to give us permission to do the right thing, we might not ever act. I think that we will win this nomination one community, one voter, one caucus goer at a time. And so I'm showing up to listen to people about the things that are most important to them, to build those commitments and that movement, not just to secure the nomination and to defeat Trump, but to make sure that we're up to the greatest challenges that we've ever faced in this country. So either as a candidate or as president, I won't allow polls to dictate doing what is right for this country.
But there were stories that were almost a year before the Texas race that were saying, you know, you could win that one. This year, it's tougher, isn't it? I mean, can you recreate what you were able to do? What's different?
I think we'll have to go far beyond anything that I've been a part of before, and we'll have to do so in the midst of an extraordinary field of candidates. As long as we show up everywhere, include everyone, then we can not only win these elections, but we can form the movement and the consensus to get the job done once in office.
Front runner in the polls, you said we don't look at polls, but right now the front runner is Joe Biden. You've said he represents the past, that there were problems during the Obama administration. Other than the deportations, which we know you didn't like, what were the problems with the Obama administration?
Let me begin by what I'm grateful for, which is the service of President Obama, the greatest president of my lifetime, and what he was able to accomplish against some of the longest odds and dealt the worst hand of any incoming president. But we cannot be about wanting to go back to that. And I understand the nostalgia around the vice president's candidacy. We've got to look boldly to the future of this country. We have 10 years left within which to meet the existential threat of climate change. Our plan calls for us to have net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, to be halfway there by 2030, and to require all of us to commit to the work ahead in order to achieve that. When it comes to immigration, we've been talking about reform for 30 years. I want to forever free those dreamers from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens. Half steps, half measures, or only half the country will not get the job done.
And
We've got to be fiercely focused on the future.
Excuse me, you're saying that's what characterized the Obama administration, half measures?
Not at all, but I think some of the appeal of the vice president's candidacy is a return to an earlier era. And while we are grateful for that era, and certainly for the service of President Obama. I think we need to be focused on the future, because even before Donald Trump, we had challenges in this country. And whether those challenges were in immigration, whether they were in healthcare, or whether they're the fact that so many people have been locked out of participating in this economy and in our democracy, we've got to fix those things to make sure that we can meet the greatest set of challenges we've ever faced.
Well, let me ask you some specifics about a few of those. You mentioned climate change, and you've talked about harnessing the power of the market. People are asking, how do you do that? Are you talking about putting a tax, some kind of tax on carbon? What exactly do you mean?
I think that we need to set defined levels for emissions in every single sector of this economy. We need to invest in the technologies that allow us to meet those ambitious goals and to free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels. So investments in the next generation of wind and solar and the battery storage technology that will allow us to distribute what we generate onto the grid. It means putting farmers in the driver's seat through regenerative agriculture and planting cover crops to capture more carbon out of the air. In other words, everyone doing everything that they can so that we can meet the challenge of this moment and also help to lead the world to stop us from warming another 2 degrees Celsius.
But including a tax on carbon?
We might have to do that in order for us to meet those absolute caps on emissions, which is what we have to do. The scientists say that there's about 10 years left to us. So the shot clock is running down. We cannot allow for any uncertainty. There have to be defined emissions limits in this country, and much of that can be led by the federal government.
Your political philosophy overall, I mean, unlike Bernie Sanders, unlike Elizabeth Warren, they favor Medicare for all, a single-payer health care coverage. They favor a version of a universal tuition-free or debt-free college. You are not in favor of as much government support as they are. Why not?
I'm focused on the goals, and when it comes to health care, it is universal, guaranteed, high-quality care. That means if you have no insurance today, we enroll you in Medicare. If you're insufficiently insured and you can't afford your copays or your premium, you can elect to enroll in Medicare. But if you're one of the tens of millions of Americans who has employer-sponsored insurance, a member of a union who bargained for health care, perhaps in lieu of wage increases, you have a plan that you like because it works for you and your family, you should be able to keep it. That gets us there as quickly and as surely as possible. And when it comes to the affordability of higher education, many of these plans for free college only cover tuition. Our plan for debt-free education covers tuition, room, board, and books, the full cost, and also ensuring that we relieve the burden on those who are carrying that $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt right now by expanding the public service debt forgiveness program and refinancing outstanding student loan debt at far lower rates.
But not as much government support, pure federal government support, as their plans call for.
Correct, because I want to make sure that we're also not paying the full freight of wealthy Americans at a time of historic wealth and income inequality.
A story that's in the news today is Iran. The Secretary of State, Pompeo, says their U.S. assessment is that Iran is responsible for the attacks on 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman. Do you believe him, number one? And second, if this is Iran that's behind this, what should the U.S. do right now?
What I believe is that this is an administration that is gunning for war in Iran. What I believe is that we can resolve our differences with that country, which are significant, peacefully without invading yet another country in the Middle East. I want to make sure that we get to the bottom of the facts and find the evidence that the Secretary of State is talking about. I want to make sure that we convene the stakeholders in the region to address the instability that we see there. And I want to make sure that we rejoin our partners, our friends, and alliances that this president has turned his back on so that we can achieve our foreign policy goals in the Middle East, with Iran, and throughout the rest of the world.
Last question. Both Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris and others have said they would pursue a prosecution of President Trump after he leaves office. Would you do that?
I will make sure that those who are responsible for the undermining of our democracy in 2016, the obstruction of justice in the investigation that pursued the facts as to what happened in 2016, are held accountable and that justice is served. If we fail to do that, we will have set the precedent that some people are above the law. I don't know that we need to wait until the next administration. Impeachment proceedings begun now will allow us to get to those facts, to follow them as far and as high up as they go, and to make sure that we protect our democracy from future attacks and hold accountable those who are responsible for the last one.
Beto O'Rourke, running for the Democratic nomination for president. Thank you.
Thank you.